Today, IRENA has published a policy report that provides governments with a set of recommendations for a post-COVID recovery. Short-term recovery efforts should be aligned with the long-term objective of the Paris Agreement and the UN Sustainable Development Agenda. The new report is rooted in IRENA's recent Global Renewable Outlook, which shows that transforming the global energy system in line with the Paris Agreement is possible. We are at a turning point. It's time for a decisive step toward a real structural shift. This is still the decade of action. By shifting into the energy transition, as proposed by the report, the world economy will grow by an additional 1% and create 9 million energy transition-related jobs in the first 3 years of the decade. With today's report, IRENA used its global mandate on energy transition to set the course of a fully decarbonized system by the middle of this century and the vision of a world that is more resilient, prosperous, just, and capable of tackling the challenges ahead of us. Today, IRENA has published a policy report that provides governments with a set of recommendations for a post-COVID recovery. Short-term recovery efforts should be aligned with the long-term objective of the Paris Agreement and the UN Sustainable Development Agenda. The new report is rooted in IRENA's recent Global Renewable Outlook, which shows that transforming the global energy system in line with the Paris Agreement is possible. We are at a turning point. It's time for a decisive step toward a real structural shift. This is still the decade of action. By shifting into the energy transition, as proposed by the report, the world economy will grow by an additional 1% and create 9 million energy transition-related jobs in the first 3 years of the decade. With today's report, IRENA used its global mandate on energy transition to set the course of a fully decarbonized system by the middle of this century and the vision of a world that is more resilient, prosperous, just, and capable of tackling the challenges ahead of us.
Welcome to REM 2020. Every 2 years in Ravenna, in Italy, we organize the Offshore Mediterranean Conference and the alternate year, the Renewable Energy Mediterranean Conference. These are two important conference events with many thousands of participants. And this year, the 5th Renewable Energy Mediterranean Conference and exhibition was scheduled on March 11 and 12. But as we know, the pandemic has forced the organizers to first postpone and then to cancel the event. This, of course, is an unprecedented situation for the OMC and the REM organizers, who have now decided to go digital in order to save as much as possible the work done during the past month, but also, and more importantly, to give the interested community a possibility to follow the most important events which were planned during the conference. So welcome today for the first session of this series of conferences, which will deal with the transition path in the Mediterranean area in a post-COVID environment. There will be other events which will follow on the 10th of September, as you will see from the program here, which is more technical, and on the 24th of September, which is more strategic, on the new strategic priorities of the energy industry in a post-COVID environment. The 10th of September one is targeting zero emissions, new energy products and environmental solutions, always in the Mediterranean area. And then finally, on October 22nd, a conference on a session on the energy transition post-pandemic and looking ahead, going forward and for next year's OMC event. So it is my very great pleasure to, I have to start my video again apparently. So it is my very great pleasure to moderate this session, this conference today. We will be together for 1 hour and a half. The time you see here is a European Central European summertime. And for the next 1 hour and a half, we will have I will have the pleasure to be with you and with this very distinguished speakers, which are Ali Hached, who is the advisor to the Chairman and CEO of SONATRACH. We have the Minister Enrico Granara, who is the coordinator of the Euro-Mediterranean Affairs at the Italian Ministry of External Affairs. And then we will have with us, she is in parallel at another conference right now, but she will join us soon, Rabia Ferroukhi, who is the Director of the Knowledge, Policy and Finance Division at IRENA. And finally, but not least, we have Roberto Cimino, who is the Chairman of the Technology Cluster Blue Italian Growth. I will set the scene. I will make an introductory presentation before I give the floor to the speakers. What we will do, each speaker will have 10 minutes time to make an introductory presentation. I will ask 1 or 2 questions to each of them, then we will go forward. The speaker, the audience, you have a chance to send in questions on the chat line, so you can put in questions, and hopefully we have enough time at the end so that I pick up the questions which you have sent in, and I can ask them to the speaker. So if you ask for questions and you know to whom you want to address them, please write to whom you are addressing the individual question. I will now proceed to my introductory opening presentation, which is today's conference, which deals, as we know, on the transition path in the Mediterranean area, but also taking into account the post-COVID environment. Now, it just happened to be that I have been working for 3 decades on the Mediterranean energy issues and on trying to give some modest contributions to foster a sustainable socio-economic development of the region at large, thanks to energy, which, as we all know, is a conditio sine qua non for socio-economic development. Now, over these decades, I could witness that the energy debate has shifted strongly from initially focusing mainly on energy availability and energy security of supply to nowadays a focus on the sustainable energy transition, which includes, in addition to energy availability and security of supply, also and increasingly prominently local and global environmental considerations. What, on the other hand, has not changed over these decades is that the Mediterranean region is located at the crossroads of civilizations and that it is made up of countries with varied economic, political, and cultural profiles. Such an incredibly rich diversity encompassed in a small single region around the Mediterranean creates a certain microcosm that reflects global challenges, trends, and tendencies. I have thus always felt that the Mediterranean region constitutes a kind of a laboratory for the world. It provides, as a matter of fact, the perfect opportunity to closely analyze different socioeconomic development trends and related energy challenges. Now, the rapid economic development in the southern and eastern Mediterranean countries, which is indeed needed as the region needs to catch up with the north, is leading to a significant increase in energy demand in the region and is therefore changing the economic and energy landscape of the whole region. Which brings me to a few major challenges. Now, on the one hand side, we have the large consuming countries of the region, both north and south. They are growing increasingly energy dependent, and fossil fuel exports from producing countries in the south of the Mediterranean are being hampered by the strongly increasing domestic consumption they are themselves facing. The region, on the other side, is also particularly vulnerable to the effects of climate change, with the impacts of these changes already resonating throughout the area. Now, we need to be aware that while temperatures have globally risen by 1 degree centigrade compared to the pre-industrial average, they have actually increased by 1.4 degrees centigrade in the Mediterranean region. And if we continue with the current trends, and if global warming rises well above 2 degrees centigrade, most of the Mediterranean basin could quickly turn into a desert. So these challenges are huge challenges, but if we tackle them properly, the particularity of the Mediterranean also represent opportunities for the region, because the region is endowed with substantial energy efficiency potentials and a very large renewable energy resources, among other things which we will discuss later on. So the strongly increasing energy demand driven by, in southern and eastern Mediterranean countries, driven by demographic and socioeconomic growth in the region, could be fueled in a sustainable way, contributing to an effective and successful energy transition in the region. We all know that the continuation of past global and regional development trends will lead to an unsustainable contribution to ever-growing greenhouse gas emissions, creating havoc on the climate, both globally, but also in the region. Future climate change could critically undermine efforts for sustainable development in the Mediterranean region. In particular, climate change may add to existing problems of desertification, water scarcity, and food production, while also introducing new threats to human health, ecosystems, and national economies of countries. Now, also, the Mediterranean region is expected to experience negative and potentially severe impacts as a result of climate change, as we have said earlier on. It has therefore the potential to represent a major part of the solution, both to the benefit of itself and also of the world. As I mentioned earlier, there's a huge availability of energy efficiency potential and renewable energy sources, among others, in the Mediterranean countries. Especially, there's a huge potential on solar energy, on wind energy, and most of this is still untapped. Now, also, southern and eastern Mediterranean countries have over the years have set ambitious goals for renewables. The actual rate of implementation of national plans is still quite low. So an example, today, almost 80% of the region's renewable energy supply is in the northern European Mediterranean countries. And of the remaining 20% concentrated in southern and eastern Mediterranean countries, the lion's share refers to Turkey. Now, if we now just look at the southern Mediterranean countries, which I would like to define as those North African, the 5 North African countries, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, where, as we know, Algeria, Libya, Egypt are important hydrocarbon producers, while Morocco and Tunisia are important net energy importers. We can see that most countries have over the very last years been very actively increasing also renewable energy developments. First of all, Egypt, which at the beginning of this year had almost 1,900 megawatts of solar installed and almost 1,400 megawatts of wind capacity installed. But also Morocco, with almost the 750 megawatts solar and more than 1,200 megawatts of wind capacity installed. And also Algeria, with some 450 megawatts of solar capacity, and Tunisia, with some 250 megawatts of wind capacity. So something is finally moving fast also in the southern Mediterranean countries. And of course, sustainable development, sustainable energy path do not only refer to renewable electricity. There's a wonderful, a tremendous potential for solar warm water production. We very often underestimate that potential in the region, as well as more generally of energy efficiency measures, which are very important as well, and which we underestimate everywhere, including in Europe, and also in the southern and eastern Mediterranean countries, all of which are often much cheaper than increasing traditional energy supply. So today, during this conference, we want to discuss what are the lessons learned from the last decades of sustainable energy programs in the region, and what needs to be done concretely to make the sustainable energy transition a reality also in the Mediterranean region, which part of which is somehow lacking a little bit behind compared to other world regions. So without further ado, I would propose to give the floor immediately to my friend Ali Hached, who will present us what has happened in Algeria, what the developments are as far as renewable energy is in Algeria, and what the future plans are, both as far as Algeria is concerned, and in particular also of a very important oil and gas company, which is a national oil company of Algeria called SONATRACH. Ali, the floor is yours. You have to, somebody has to give you the, yes, you can now talk.
Huh?
You just have to talk.
Ici, share screen.
Yeah, Ali, we hear you. You just start.
Yes, yes.
And then somebody should put up the slides for Ali Hached.
Ça y est, je peux parler.
S'il vous plaît.
Okay. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Mr. Hached, the advisor to the Chairman and CEO of SONATRACH. I spent 43 years in SONATRACH, and I am very happy to share with you some of our views in terms of renewable energies and SONATRACH's role in the solar PV plants. First of all, you know that we started to build a program in renewable energy in 2011, and we had at that time a very ambitious program trying to set around 22,000 megawatts of capacity. But due to many things in Algeria, you know, we did not succeed to implement that program. And after the decrease in price of oil, as you remember in 2014, we revised the program, excluding 10,000 megawatts for exports, because it was very difficult taking into account the electricity directive in Europe, that we cannot really, on the very short time, implement all the program. And we revised that program in 2015, and also due to many reasons, we are not been able to really implement completely that program. And today, what we can say is that we have only for at least 400 megawatts of capacity in exploitation today. And 2 or 3 weeks ago, the new government of Algeria has decided to really revise the plan and to be perhaps less ambitious, but more realistic, and to put a two-phase program, a program from 2020 to 2024 of 4,000 megawatts, and a step 2 between 2025 and 2035, another program of around 11,000 of megawatts. That means a total program of 15,000 megawatts. Part of that, I wanted to explain to you and to present to you what is doing SONATRACH today. Of course, SONATRACH is part of the National Energy Program and has decided to be fully in line with the National Renewable Energy Strategy of the country. And this program is part of this main strategic thrust and is principally based on solar energy development. And we have 2 solar voltaic programs. One is completely dedicated to PV power plants connected to SONATRACH sites with an amount of 1.3 gigawatt. And another one is a program of 1 gigawatt of PV power station connected to the national grid. But of course, this mandate given by the Prime Minister at that time is conditioned by the implementation of associated regulation. And we are waiting for that regulation. Let's talk about SONATRACH plan. This program of 1.3 gigawatt photovoltaic solar has two objectives mainly. First, to produce electricity from a new source and at an optimum cost. Secondly, to save volume of gas. And the calculation made estimate that we can save around 600 million cubic meters a year for this kind of program. And of course, a general view is to commit to the strategic axis of development of renewable energies. We have, of course, to implement this program to identify the sites, and we have shown a very good presentation at the beginning of this webinar by Eni, showing what Eni is doing in Algeria. And we have, with Eni, identified sites in Algeria, which is a critical step in realizing the project. And we have, of course, to prepare the tender documents. We have the support of two organizations, the African Development Bank support to help us to finance studies, and an agreement with Electricity and Gas Engineering Company, which is a subsidiary of Sonelgaz, to help us to define precisely the project. The investment concerned for this program is around $700–800 million. The electricity we are going to produce, it's around 2.2 terawatt-hours a year. And as I told you before, we are going to save around 600 million cubic meters a year. If you take the other program which is planned today, it means that at the end of these two programs, we can save 1 billion cubic meter of gas each year, which is very important for us. And for doing that project, we have two partnerships. The Eni SONATRACH partnership, which you have seen already, and we have signed an MOU, a new MOU in April 2020 to strengthen the development of this program. And we have under discussion a new MOU with the company of Total. Okay, what are the, because we have only 10 minutes, I go directly to the conclusion and messages. You have almost 7 messages on my presentation. The update of the 2015 program was initiated in relation to basically these elements. First, the decrease of cost for the photovoltaic and wind energy technologies considered to be mature today. And as renewables become cheaper, the current program seems more realistic and should be carried out at their best cost conditions. Secondly, we have learned and a better understanding of the different technologies and of the national potential in renewable energies in Algeria. We have seen also the persistent high cost of the CSP sector technology and its slower maturation. We have also the completion of consistent and attractive regulation for investors in the public and or private sector. And the revision is based on the large-scale development and in priority of the photovoltaic and wind technologies, and by integrating biomass, cogeneration, geothermal energy, solar thermal progressively. And at the end, which is very important for SONATRACH, the accelerated development of renewable energies could contribute to reduce domestic gas demand and consolidate gas exports. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ali, for this very clear presentation. Let me maybe just ask you a question before we move on. So you are talking about 60 BCM, which could be saved. Did I understand it properly?
Yes, globally, from the time between 2000 today and
globally.
2035.
Okay, globally.
Global.
Okay. I was quite surprised that SONATRACH, I mean, we have Sonelgas, who has been in the development of renewable energy in Algeria for years, trying to do something with partner, and now also SONATRACH entering the market. We see this worldwide. International oil companies, they try to move from being oil and gas companies into energy companies. Is this also a strategy of SONATRACH? Do you also want to become an energy company, not just mainly an oil and gas company?
You have an oil mine in front of you, and we have a long experience in hydrocarbon. Algeria, as you know, is highly dependent on its hydrocarbon resources, but I think Algeria is also now seriously turning to renewable energy. And SONATRACH, as I told you on my presentation, is part of this new strategy as a national oil company. Therefore, it works to implement public interest programs and contributes to the creation of the country wealth in the energy sector in general and hydrocarbons in particular. SONATRACH is fully in line, as I told before, with the national renewable energy strategy. It's part of this strategy, which is principally based on solar energy development. As you remember, in March 2017, SONATRACH started an ambitious program to equip all its oil and gas fields with solar power plants in order to save large volumes of hydrocarbons and reduce CO2 emissions. In 2018, we have included energy renewables on our strategy as a means of development at the heart of the energy transition by implementing a program aimed at covering at least 80% of the needs of the oil sites. SONATRACH aims, of course, to be one of the key players in the production of renewable energy by carrying out these two programs I presented to you. But to respond directly to your question, I think this shift in our strategy, the starting of that, is also to create value. And create value means that we are progressively trying to lay the groundwork for this transformation in the very long term.
Thank you very, very much. We will now move on with Minister Granara. We will come back at the end in the panel discussion to questions to all the panelists, and we will wait for the audience who is invited to send us questions. I have been told that I'm muted. I'm unmuted again. Okay. So I give the floor to Enrico Granara, to the Minister Enrico Granara, to present us a more policy view on the potential, on the cooperation, how the historical view and the future view on how the cooperation between Europe and the southern and eastern Mediterranean can be increased, fostered in order to go for this energy transition, which we all call.
Well, thank you, Professor Hafner, and thanks to REM and its organizers, and good afternoon to you all from my home right behind the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Olympic Stadium in Rome. For the sake of good order, I'm a Minister Plenipotentiary. This means a state minister issued from the diplomatic career and not a cabinet minister. Inviting the Italian coordinator for multilateral initiatives in the Mediterranean means that you expect him to talk about what he knows regarding the formats in which these initiatives are taking place, namely in the common northern, southern, eastern Mediterranean areas. From this limited perspective, if you will, you are probably not going to be disappointed. Let us imagine that we are here to explain the rationale behind the energy cooperation in the Mediterranean to someone coming from Japan or Chile, asking us some basic questions such as, when did it start? What kind of organization is there? What are the main guidelines? What about the achievements and so on? If I were to start my account at the time I took this position, right after the Amman UFM Energy Conference in June 2013, I would say that the only intergovernmental forum around the Mediterranean basin is the Union for the Mediterranean, the UFM, which has a relatively small secretariat in charge of a number of broad transnational issues entrusted to it by conferences of ministers, which means ministerial meetings. And among these transnational issues, we have the three main energy areas: gas, energy efficiency, renewables, interconnections, and the task of helping to create a regional energy market. Our Far Eastern and South American friends might also like to know whether the UFM was designed to work in a similar way as ASEAN or Mercosur. The answer should be yes. This was the idea, in fact, in 2008 when it was created, and even more in 2012 when the Barcelona Secretariat was inaugurated. The UFM, as the only forum including 27 European Union member states, 10 Arab League member states bordering with the Mediterranean, plus Turkey, Israel, and the EU applicants from the Balkans, was actually meant to operate as a UN second-generation organization aimed at helping governments to achieve a number of UN Sustainable Development Goals, which continues to be its mandate today. When it comes at energy, we very well know that this region faces some very serious challenges. It is home to an increasing population of 500 million people with growing energy demands. According to the Observatoire Méditerranéen de l'Énergie, OME, the per capita energy demand is estimated to increase by 62% in southern and eastern Mediterranean countries by 2040. And this is taking 2018 as the reference year. The Mediterranean is also experiencing an intensive industrialization process. And before this current pandemics took over, a tourism growth that is also, or was also, putting pressure on the available energy resources. Since its outset, the main focus of the Euromed cooperation in this field has been that of working on a regional comprehensive approach to energy transition. When I started following this process, the main emphasis was on the two so-called master plans based on solar energy, Desert Tech, proposed by Germany, and the Med-Solar Plan proposed by France. These two plans turned out not to be the best applicable solution in the rapidly changing economic and market reality over the years. They were both set out around 2007, 2008, and as you will remember, that was the time of the global financial downturn. Therefore, they did not take into account the gradual shift of energy demand taking place on a wider regional scale, a slowing growth in the northern shore economies, and a rising demand among the southern shores states, Egypt, Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia, then Turkey and neighbors. Despite being increasingly detached from the changing reality on the ground, these twin plans continued to stay on the UFM tables for another couple of years. And we must admit this was not really the most encouraging sign for a new organization whose working method should be based on the principle of co-ownership, which means equality among its 40 effective members. No wonder that this lack of common vision actually helped causing the failure of a couple of ministerial conferences, including the one in Brussels at the end of 2013. And very few people were left wondering why, because this fact, which was already important, didn't receive enough publicity. At some point of the story, however, the Euromed agenda promoted by the Directorate General for Energy in the EU Commission was able to adjust the agenda by putting a major emphasis on how to plan an efficient power transmission network at regional level. A new role for the regional technical organizations was encouraged, starting from MED-TSO and MED-REG. And this was when the MED-TSO tried to enhance its profile, thanks to a sort of soft Italian leadership, we might call it, in terms of proposing an effective work plan to the 18-member strong organization of system operators. Why don't we first create a data bank for the Mediterranean electrical sector? Since I have to stay in my 10 minutes deadline, this could be one question by the floor. What happened to this data bank, perhaps? And my closing comment at this stage is that we are soon going to see what the new European Green Deal has in storage for the Mediterranean region. The message that governments in Italy, Spain, and perhaps others from the Northern Shore are now sending to Brussels is that the Mediterranean region as a whole must be considered as an integral part of the new European Green Deal by the EU Commission. Without including the Southern Shore, no EU Green Plan can have a chance of success. And this is what we stand for. One effective way to do it is to reinforce the operational capacity of the UFM Secretariat in Barcelona, which was left so far to conduct its business with extremely limited means. This is the only venue where, if you think about it, where experts of the northern, southern, eastern shores can work together, trying to find the most convenient solutions for all our nations. And if we just give a look to the 2019 MED ECC report from the climatologists working together from our different shores, the long-term consequences of climate change in this region, and previous speakers have mentioned this, well, we would inevitably conclude that if we don't empower our experts, we are going to face growing disasters throughout the enlarged Mediterranean region. Well, thank you for listening to me. I'll be happy to respond to your questions.
Thank you very much, Minister Granara. You spoke a lot about the Union for the Mediterranean, and apologies for us who are not always in the control rooms as you are, following what is happening. But to many of us, I mean, the Union for the Mediterranean has been around for more than 10 years now. And for many of us, and including myself, it has not always been very clear to realize the very concrete achievements of the Union for the Mediterranean during these 10 years. So maybe you could enlighten us on what, in your view, has been achieved on the one hand side, both as far as the Mediterranean cooperation is concerned, and in particular, as far as the sustainable energy cooperation is concerned, and what, in your opinion, have been the major stumbling blocks in achieving the goals which the Union for the Mediterranean had set itself 10 years ago. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your questions, Professor Hafner. Well, I thought that my cryptical language during my presentation would have provided some answers already to the main questions or the achievements of the UFM and its UFM secretariats. Well, to explain my views, I'm a supporter of the theory that when you don't find major responsibles for some actions and you are in a Western saloon, you are very much tempted to shoot at the pianist because it's the most obvious target in this case. And the Secretariat of the UFM fills the role of the pianist very well. Well, getting out of this parallel, a Midwestern parallel, I would say that the UFM was created at the time of the major global downturn. We are still facing the consequences of that, in addition to those that we are now coping with because of the pandemics. And at that time, 2007, 2008, it was clear that the European governments were withdrawing from many of their plans for cooperation, for investments, ideally addressed to the southern Mediterranean shores and to sub-Saharan Africa. We have seen this phenomenon growing over the years. So this was the time when the UFM took over, and we can clearly label it as a sort of anti-climax event. It was going against the trend for very peculiar political reasons that were those governing the French head of state of the time, who was the mastermind of this regional organization. And I think he must be given credit for that, because this remains to be the only intergovernmental forum in the Mediterranean where you can have the Israeli and the Palestinian side sitting together. And I'm not quoting other members around the Mediterranean table having conflicts or having serious differences with their neighbors. They're all sitting there. And this is a very important fact. But this is clearly not enough. You have to build something out of it. The main problem has been that a lack of political investment has entailed a lesser degree of financial exposure, a less degree of financial investment, as if the European governments entrusted the European Commission to take care of this business as a matter of routine. And consequently, a technostructure like the European Commission performed in the only way possible according to its mandate and to its practice. And the end result is that we do have a secretariat in Barcelona. They are striving to do their best, but with an organization of 70 people, with less than 7 or 8 people taking care of energy and environmental, climate issues, then they have a stronger blue economy, water, and environmental division, which is a bit stronger than that. Well, you cannot expect many results. So it is basically a matter of investing more. And our Bible, so to say, should be now the MED-ECC climate report. I don't know whether my answer satisfied completely your questions, because there are obviously other aspects to talk about.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So it's basically what I understand, a lack of commitment by the countries, and we need to go on, but we'll come back to this, and the question will be later on in the debate, what can be done? What chances do we have to give to have more commitment? But we need to move on now. and we go to my friend Rabia Ferroukhi, with whom I have had the pleasure of working together for many, many years when we were both working at the Observatoire Méditerranée de l'Énergie. And she's now a director of policy, technology, and finance, I think, at the at IRENA, at the International Renewable Energy Agency. And I'm very happy, very pleased to have you here, Rabia, to present us something about the policy and what should be done as far as policy is concerned in the Mediterranean. You have a huge knowledge both on renewables and on the region. You're yourself from the region. So just for your information, we know that you have been at another conference in parallel to ours, but your Director General, who is your direct boss, has in the movie we saw at the beginning of our conference, he was there presenting the new report you have yourself written and co-authored, and you have had the responsibility of that. So go ahead, Rabia, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Manfred. It's always nice to see longtime friends. I'm just wondering whether, and thank you for the invitation, of course. I'm just wondering whether we can have the slides. Oh, perfect, great. Thank you so much. Yes. Thank you, thank you. It's a pleasure for me to be here and to see some friends around, some of whom I haven't seen for a long time. Over the past couple of months, as Manfred just mentioned, I've been basically locked up, not just because of COVID, but in order to write this report on post-COVID recovery, where we're trying to see basically to use the energy sector as a lever for wider transformative recovery by highlighting the investment needs and provide evidence for the benefits that can be generated from moving towards a more sustainable energy transition path. And of course, with a list of policy recommendations, some of which are quite specific, some more general, which I go very briefly into. I know I only have 10 minutes, so I'll try to go very fast. But just very quickly, that the recommendations that we are providing in this report, they adapt IRENA's ambitious medium and long-term energy transformation pathway to today's situation. So if I can have the first slide, please. So very briefly, this is what 2050 looks like in our scenario, and the outlook under what we call the energy transforming energy scenario, we see that we can achieve 70% emission reduction globally in line with the Paris Agreement. And with other technological options, we can go down to 90% for hard to decarbonize sectors. The next slide, please. So I'm taking you now from 2050 to 2030, just to see approximately what are the investment requirements. And here, as you can see, we say that total investments, including in renewable energy, grid infrastructure, energy efficiency, and electrification of end-use sectors would require about $4.5 trillion per year annually from now to 2030. This, in our scenario for the Middle East and North Africa, is about 6% of total investment. Now, what is important and what I'm focusing on today, and that goes back to what Enrico was speaking about, the sort of lack of political engagement and the need to do better in terms of the region, because we know today, as Ali was mentioning, renewable energy, the costs are decreasing. They have proven through the COVID crisis to be more resilient. Of course, there were issues, but more resilience, including in the supply chain, the global supply chain. And what I want to focus today on is the benefits that can accrue from such a transition. So if we move to the next slide, you can see that, first of all, it's very interesting to note that for each $1 million that is invested in renewable energy and energy flexibility, it creates 25 jobs. For energy efficiency, each million investment is 10 full-time equivalent jobs. This is 3 times higher than in job intensity in fossil fuel. So if we move to, globally, sorry, the one before, globally, we have an additional 15 million jobs if we go more towards sustainable pathway. For an increase of GDP, boost of GDP of about 1.3% per year. Now for the MENA region, Middle East and North Africa, it's a net additional 1.3 million jobs in energy, in transition-related energy technologies, above the business as usual, what we have planned as government, and a loss of jobs in conventional energy as well of about 450,000. Next one, and this comes really, this is a present to Manfred. This comes really from the oven today, from our macroeconometric modeling. We did a zoom on North Africa, where we see that the additional boost over the period from now to 2030 in GDP could be about 0.8%. This is additional to what would happen anyway. So please take this not as a growth in GDP, but an additional boost. In terms of welfare, which is another indicator that we have, we could see a 5% improvement in welfare. And finally, in terms of jobs, jobs in renewable energy from the total that we have in renewable energy by 2030 could be about 500,000 people. I'm gonna focus a lot on jobs and value creation because I'm a big believer in national but also regional supply chains in order to create greater value at the regional or national level. So in the next slide, you see what we have done is we have taken hundreds of projects, real projects, to see along the segment of the value chain during the lifetime of the project, how the occupational requirements, the skill sets that are required, and how many, the volume over every segment of the value chain of different renewable energy technology. And I'm not going to go into that, but I can share with you what it is. We started from project planning all the way to decommissioning through the different value chain in order to see what it is that you need in terms of skills and education in order to create your national or regional at best value chain. So if we go to the next one, we've applied this to North Africa. And we see here for North Africa, the results by the jobs by technology, by segments of the value chain, for the different occupational segments to inform policy makers on the design and implementation of recovery programs and policy to maximize again national or regional value chain. Next one, please. Of course, the region has existing policies that relate to the energy transition. And again, I'm not going to go into that. I've put a few flags there just to show that there have been, of course, direct policies and instruments to support deployment. I mean, Algeria, Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, they all have, for instance, contracting solar and wind energy or energy capacity through auctions. These auctions have resulted in some record prices, including in CSP, for example, in Morocco, but for solar PV in many other countries, including Egypt, etc. Some countries like Morocco have included local content requirements in auctions to strengthen the domestic value chains. There's been a lot of net metering policies that have been introduced. Now, for the enabling policies, most countries have already targets. The NDCs are being reviewed right now. There's a good opportunity to enhance maybe the ambition and seek help to support these ambitions. And again, there's a lot of enabling conditions that are being put in front, but also an important one where I put also a few countries for integrating policies to try to integrate greater share of variable renewable energy. Morocco had made some headways, for example, in thermal storage in the Ouarzazate solar complex to basically to ensure dispatchability and flexibility. In Lebanon, we've seen individual solar PV plus battery storage project, etc. I'm not going to go into it, and I'm sure most of you know that. But all I want to say here is, if you can go to the next slide, and I hope I'm not over my time, is that in this report, we're trying to identify a range of measures that can align the post-COVID recovery with the holistic policy framework. I mean, we have the technologies, the costs are going down, so there's something else that we need to do, and we need to prepare in order to gain the greatest benefit from this transition, and to not to have a concentration of winners of today, those who own the IP, etc., being the winners of tomorrow. We all need to share in the value that this energy transition can bring. So, of course, we have, I'll just give a few examples. I just spoke already about the ambition, but public intervention is there to shift towards a cleaner transition path, have conditional bailouts for some countries, some more developed countries, etc. However, right now, we need to safeguard some of the power projects and maintain the investment plans, of course, in power, but also start ensuring the uptake of renewable energy in all other end users through investment and financial incentives, where it's not so straightforward that you would go for renewable energy. And then the last point that I would like to make is that those investments, those measures that we introduce in deployment and in facilitating a greater share of variable renewable energy or energy efficiency initiatives, they go hand in hand with policies to leverage local capabilities through industrial policies, a word that nobody wanted to hear for a couple of decades, but I think COVID makes it clear that we can. Because in order to build up supply chains that are stronger, and at the same time, and diversify, and at the same time expand the available pool of skills and labor, but also all these policies go hand in hand with labor and social protection policies in order to match supply and demand for jobs and skill, in order to maybe retrain and fossil fuel workers that may lose their jobs, and integrate social equity consideration. I'm gonna just finish with one thing, which is that really I think it's a very important moment, I think, where we can for once integrate in the stimulus packages and the recovery plans all the policies that we recommend, and there are really many to go into, but all of these can drive a wider structural shift that can foster national and regional energy transition strategies and ultimately be a major step in building a more equitable, inclusive, and resilient economies and societies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rabia, for this enlightening presentation. I know that all the IRENA reports are public, are free. We can all download them. So we will also find the assumptions of the figures you have given, but in your calculations. Which report is it? The one you have based your calculations on?
So we have, this is two reports really. The basis
just for us to know where we have to get information from, because it was very rich.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm sorry. So the pathways that of the energy transition pathway is what we launched in April in the Berlin Energy Transition Dialogue, which is called the Global Renewables Outlook. This is where you find the global and the regional, about 10 region breakdown. The granularity of what I gave for North Africa is something I did for you. But
the methodology is the same as the one you have used in another report, right?
Exactly. And then what all the policies and benefits for the short term is things that we have in the report that we launched with the Financial Times last week. That's where you saw the DG also starting presenting it a little bit, which is called the post-COVID recovery, an agenda for resilience, sustainability, and development, something like that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We still have 2 minutes for you, and then we move on. And the 2 minutes, I think we should devote them to give you a chance to highlight in with a few sentences the main results of the study which you just published today on the post-COVID reports, Agenda for Development, Resilience, and so on, which is very timely. Maybe you just publish it today because of us, I don't know. But it's very timely, and I think you should have a chance to present it in a few minutes, very few minutes. And I think you even have a slide for that. So if our friends, the organizers, could put up that slide, you could just comment it very briefly.
It doesn't matter, even if the slide is not there. So everything I told you for 2030, we adapted it to the next 3 years in order to see if we, the investment that we plan, we recommend in energy transition related technologies is about 2 trillion per year for the next 3 years, and then move to 2030 with 4.5 trillion. And what we say is we calculated for the 3 years how many jobs that would globally bring, and also what GDP boost that would bring. So this is the slide. No, this was another one, but it's
the last one, the very last one.
It doesn't matter. It just gives you an idea of how it looks like in terms of the benefits.
Later.
But very frankly, I would urge you to, it's after the thank you, if you really want to have it there. It's after the thank you. But what we did is, maybe I can give you, this is it, yeah. So this is what happens globally between 2021 and 2023 in case we do invest 2 trillion per year over the next 3 years in energy transition related technologies. Now, what I would really urge you to do is the report is very rich in terms of policies. They're categorized in terms of ambition, in terms of public intervention, in terms of investment and required policies for the power sector, for heating and cooling, for transport, and then accompanying policies in terms of employment, industry, so industrial policies to benefit from the diversified supply chain, etc. Then we have also, of course, we never speak about access because in our case it might not be as relevant as other regions, but there's also different policies for the short term, the 2021-2023, and then the medium term, which is up to 2030, which is very precise kind of policies that you need to introduce. Thank you, Manfred.
Thank you very much, Rabia. I think it was useful. I mean, you put so much work into writing these reports and with so many experts, so it's useful that we get a glance and then you make sure that we get curious to go and to dig into the reports itself. Okay, thank you very much. Stay with us. And we now move on to my other friend, Roberto Cimino, with whom I have had the pleasure to work very heavily last year, and who, besides of being a vice president of ENI, is also the chairman of the technology cluster Blue Italian Growth, and he will tell us what it is, and he will tell us all about it. It's quite interesting. It's quite interesting. Roberto, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Manfred. Thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to be even, we are virtually in Ravenna, in virtual mode. And I'll try to share.
Somebody who, yeah, okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
Are you hearing me? Yes?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. I will try to share my screen just to, let's say, okay. Can you see the slides?
Yes.
Okay, good. So the topic you have assigned me for today is basically talk a little bit about the Blue Italian Growth Technology Cluster. And I thought the topic might be the role of technology cluster in the transition across the Mediterranean. So basically, what are the clusters? What are technology clusters? Basically, technology clusters are partnerships, private-public partnerships, gathering together different actors, gathering together in general actors interested in innovation, innovating and transferring research and development to the field. We are basically a national cluster. This means that our community is made up of all the major Italian entities interested in the blue economy. So among our associates, we have 22 universities, Italian universities. We have 9 regional districts interested in marine economy and marine technologies. All the national research centers interested in the same topics, business consortia, small, medium enterprises, large companies, and other organizations. So the idea here is to gather together the various actors to create a community and to create an environment where we can favor cross-fertilization of the idea, exchange of competence, exchange of know-how, and rapid transfer of technology. What are we interested in is very large, very wide, very broad. We have the research and the innovation in marine habitat and coastal zone, in fishery and aquaculture. We have shipbuilding and marine robotics. We have blue biotechnology, and we have energy. Energy is represented here by oil and gas and let's say beyond oil and gas and blue renewables. We are part of a broader system, and the system is made up of 70 regional and national blue growth clusters in Europe. Our cluster is recently 3 years live now, and we are working to create, let's say, several projects to help the transition. First of all, since one of the topics of the talk is the impact of the COVID, let me underline, as the other speakers have already done, that the recent COVID-19 crisis is basically slowing down investments. It has 2 effects: slowing down investments, postponing projects, as well as it has a dramatic impact on the economy. This is hardly good news as far as the GHG abatement scenarios are concerned. We should be in the position to cut 6% of CO2 emission per year up to 2050 to match the Paris pledges. We know that. And as of today, the other major energy consultancy and organization, which the International Energy Agency, has released its newest report on the perspective to match these targets. And the messages they gave this morning are basically very clear. We are in delay, and there is no hope to match the 2050 Paris pledges unless we accelerate the innovation. So innovation and technology innovation is key to accelerate decarbonization, and is also key to create new jobs, as we have seen from the previous slide. So basically what we have to do is to accelerate and to create the condition to rapidly transfer ideas to industrialization. Let me give you some example on how the Mediterranean can become an hotspot for technology innovation and let's say for energy transition by deploying innovative low carbon technologies. Let's start from a project pilot at the pilot stage. We have here offshore Ravenna. You see here the let's say the network of offshore platform in Ravenna. We have here basically a pilot project testing a new converter, inertial sea wave energy converter, aimed at converting the wave energy into electricity. This is a very huge, there is a very huge potential for creating renewable energy from wave and tidal energy. This is a very innovative project, very new, but it's also very concrete because there is already, let's say, an agreement between Eni and Fincantieri. Both of these companies are associates of our clusters. Terna and Cassa Depositi e Prestiti, which is the investment, national investment entity. We're starting from this pilot project with a different organization of the work. There is already let's say, an industrial plan to finance, test, and deploy this type of technology, especially across the tiny islands bordering Italy. Another example on how the cross-fertilization of ideas can create a new technology in industrial sectors is this project, which is located offshore Abruzzo, so in the southern Adriatic Sea, which aims at exploring the possibility of retrofitting an existing platform. You see the platform there, by using basically, again, integration of wave energy production with aquaculture, so fish farming, as well as carbonate accretion, which is a technology aimed at, let's say, improving the marine ecosystem undersea. Again, this is a project where the private-public partnership and the cooperation between an industrial partner like Eni and an array, a broad array of university, the major is University Politecnica delle Marche, is providing, let's say, the rapid transfer of ideas to testing and to industrialization. So finally, we think that the national technology cluster are a powerful tool to bring to the same table academia, research institutions, large enterprises, SMEs. This is a very unique, let's say, unique arena for bringing together these entities, cross-fertilizing the environment with different ideas, and creating the condition for acceleration, basically. We know that innovation comes from dialogue, especially multidisciplinary dialogue, cross-fertilization, and cross-sector transfer of lessons learned. From this point of view, the Mediterranean is already an hotspot. It can become an hotspot for testing innovation at the proper scale, also experimenting new business models, because all these projects, and I'm thinking, for instance, to the project of retrofitting the offshore platform with aquaculture, integrating aquaculture and the wave energy, needs business model. And can be also a platform for a dialogue between northern and southern shore by transferring ideas from one side of the Mediterranean to the other side of the Mediterranean. From this point of view, I'm happy to report here that we have recently signed a memorandum of understanding with the Tunisian Blue National Cluster. This is one of the first partnership that we are going to sign across the Mediterranean. And I think this is the beginning for a fruitful transfer of know-how and experiences and projects across the two shores. And finally, let me conclude by saying that the oil and gas offshore sector is a good example on how innovation and cross-fertilization can create new opportunities, growth, and jobs, while decarbonizing the economy and favoring the transition. So that's all. Here you can find the contacts, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I give you back the microphone.
Thank you, Roberto. I do have a question for you as well, but before I ask you the question, let me just announce that after we finish with you, I will have a question for everybody. We have still a few minutes left afterwards. We can exceed slightly the 16:30 time frame which we have set. So the question to everybody would be, in a few words, what do you think, in a nutshell, what should be done to promote the energy transition in the Mediterranean countries, given the present situation of the coronavirus and the follow-up for the next years? What do we need to do, in a few words, in a few sentences? Now I come back to Roberto Cimino. This is that everybody can think about, depending on what your field is, what you want to say. For Roberto, the question is, you have presented us and you have mentioned that there are more than 70 regional blue clusters across the Mediterranean. You have presented some of them, what they do. What I wonder is, are they integrated, or are they all separated, scattered around? And how can these regional 70 or whatever regional blue clusters, what active role can they play in the transition of the whole region? I mean, is there a cooperation among these clusters?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, the process has started. They are not yet fully integrated, but the process has started. There is an Interreg project aiming at building a common platform among the regional clusters. 9 countries are participating. And this is, let's say, the start of integration among the different clusters. What they can do, basically, also to anticipate the answer to the second question, I think that what we have to do in the next years is basically accelerate. This is the key word. In order to accelerate, we need to invest, and we need to test, experiment, and transfer best practices from one place to the other. The system of the national, in the regional blue cluster is a good example on how experiences can be brought from one part of the Mediterranean to the other part of the Mediterranean, can favor scaling up, can favor transfer of technology. And this is, I think, what we have to do in the Mediterranean in the years to come.
Thank you very much. So you have already answered also the general question, which is perfect. You're too good for us. Now let us give the floor to the lady, Rabia. What is your point you want to give us on what concretely should be done, and by whom and how?
Thank you, Manfred. I think we should make sure that investments move towards energy transition-related technologies. Again, this is renewables, energy efficiency, grids, infrastructure, etc. And that can be done for whatever the governments are, willing to invest and leverage through that private investments. I think through partnerships, for example, with Europe, much more can be done. And again, I think the European Commission package has something for Africa. I'm not sure how. I'm sorry. I'm sure you know, but I'm not sure how the Mediterranean is integrated in that. How it is integrated in that. I would really push for. Of course, the investments are needed in different transition-related technologies, and they depend on the end-use sector. However, I would really push for leveraging local capabilities as much as possible, train and retrain towards these new technologies, and diversify supply chains. And that means in the short term, reduce entry barriers to local firms seeking access in the value chain, etc. There are many industrial policies that can help at the national or regional level. And by regional, it's not just north-south, it's also south-south. So I think this is an opportunity, I hope, for the countries who try to create regional value chains and towards the energy transition. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rabia. Now we have the Minister Granara. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you. My answer, as you can understand, can only be from a political diplomatic outlook. And the key word here, independently from the COVID pandemic crisis, is interdependence. We are a closed sea. The Mediterranean is a closed sea. Our recent experience over the last 10 years or so has showed us that we can only reach solutions by working together. So the key word is interdependence. Throwing one's weight on a multilateral arena like the one we live, trying perhaps to impose unilaterally manufactured solutions, or at best bilateral, is not the best course of action, as our experience shows. What we need to do is to have consistency, a consistency between the declared commitments, the engagement, the declared commitments signed in the ministerial declarations, and the actual behavior on the ground. So this is what we need most, to learn that we must live in a multilateral setting. I have been turned into being a fan of a definition given by the Moroccan Minister of Foreign Affairs, Nasser Bourita, who said as earlier as January or February that our situation is that of a multilateralisme de proximité. So we must take care, we must learn to take care of our neighbors, because this is the best way to take care of ourselves. I don't think I need to say more about it. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Now let's give the floor to Ali Hached. Ali?
Thank you. It's very easy for me to answer the question. As you know, I told you, we really have the willingness to start a real program on renewable. And the proof for that is that we put in place a Ministry of Energy Renewable and Energy Transition. That means it's a very good step. And we have a minister who is very, very, very engaged, on this task. And I hope we will do something. But why we didn't succeed in the past? Because a lot of probably bureaucracy in Algeria, but I think also a lack of partnership. And we need really a partnership in two ways. First, in training people, in mastering technologies, research centers, and so on, but especially also in investment in partnership with people to integrate all the value chain. That means build equipment in Algeria, realize the complete industry of renewable in our country. And I think with investment and partnership, I am sure that we will succeed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ali. Now, from the participants, I have two questions for Roberto Cimino. One by Davide Tabarelli, who asks, what about CCS in Ravenna? We heard from the Prime Minister. And the second one from Giambattista Di Ghetto, still for Roberto Cimino. He asks, in the most optimistic scenario for the next 10 to 15 years, which are, in numbers, the industrial consequences of your clusters?
Okay, let's start from CCS. It's a huge initiative. It has been announced by our Prime Minister. It has been also commented today by Eni CEO. Basically, the idea is to use the huge potential of the depleted reservoirs offshore Ravenna, which is estimated around 300, 500 million tons of CO2 of potential storage, to turn Ravenna into a CCS storage, combined also in perspective with hydrogen production. I think it's a very good example of how, as I mentioned in my last slide, the oil and gas sector can contribute by revitalizing let's say, sectors and activities which have to be changed in line with the European Green Deal imperatives, as well as with the targets of the Paris pledges. I also believe that such a project will obviously contribute to producing new jobs, maintaining existing jobs. And one of its strengths is basically based on the fact that there is an existing infrastructure, there are existing skills, know-how, and companies who know how to operate in offshore environment. So I believe that there are all the conditions to turn the North Adriatic Sea into a leading technological hub as far as CCS is concerned. As far as the second question, yeah, I think there is a huge potential. I think there is a huge potential because, as some of the speakers said before me, cooperation, interdependency, partnership, these are key words for, let's say, the work that we have to do to favor the energy transition. In numbers, it's difficult to me to tell, but if we put together, for instance, the CCS project that Mr. Davide Tabarelli was referring to, the projects I have been quoting and mentioning in my presentation, I think that potential for having industrial projects in the next 10 years is really very huge. What we need is firm investment opportunities, as well as partnership and cooperation.
Thank you very much, Roberto. Now I have a question for Rabia Ferroukhi. The question comes from Ettore Carcione, and he says, I'm reading, in your analysis, you speak about huge investment plans for renewable energy factories. Actually, such type of investment, considering the whole life cycle analysis, doesn't seem profitable if not heavily subsidized, and subsidies are coming from royalties over fossil fuels and taxes over workers' revenues. With the oil and gas industry revenues dropping, who should pay for that? And where do you think is laying the social sustainability in the energy transition? This was a question by this gentleman to you.
Well, it's a multiple question, I think, but if I understood correctly, so first of all, I think it's a right moment maybe to level off the playing field between conventional resources and cleaner or renewable energy sources. Second of all, I don't understand between the investment needs and the costs that is not about manufacturing. It's the lifetime of a project. So if I have a project, it starts with planning all the way to decommissioning, and these are real projects. It's based on real data, real project data. So you have an idea of how over the lifetime of the project. So some jobs are 6 months, some jobs are 10 years if you're in operation and maintenance, for example. So along that, that's why you see the numbers on the slide are in human persons. They're not full-time equivalent. They're human persons jobs over the lifetime, and it tells you for each segment how many jobs you get and in what kind of skills you get. So this is a potential for job creation throughout the value chain. Now, the investment I talked about for the next few years are additional to what would be planned anyways, but that includes infrastructure. It's not just renewable plants. It includes infrastructure, it includes energy efficiency, renewables, grid flexibility, etc. So this is basically the whole package of investment required towards the energy transition. So that again includes also energy efficiency. I'm not sure I understand the power plant thing. As in terms of justice, I mentioned specifically social protection measures. people losing their jobs through the energy transition have to be supported. A lot of the jobs in renewable energy, interestingly enough, don't require many skills. So it is very, and some, for example, in the offshore wind industry, can find synergy with offshore oil and gas. So there are many ways that you can plan for synergy. You can transfer some of the people losing their jobs that don't require very high skill. This is up to 50% of the jobs, for example, in renewable energy. So there are many ways, but of course you need to plan. You need to see what you have, and you need, of course, during that transition to support those more vulnerable parts of the labor market or of society. I'm not sure, and I answered all the questions, but there were too many, I think. Thanks.
I think that's fine. You did wonderful, as always. I have a last question, which is not really related to energy, but it's quite interesting. It's by Isoboye Amakri. He says it's for the panel, but given the time constraint we have, I think we should ask it to Enrico Granara, since it is more political than anything else. And the question goes as follows. Considering the attendant fear associated with a change in view of the demographic dynamics of the region, what are the structures on ground to handle this?
Well, I think that answering to these questions would require an entirely new debate, passionating as it is. My first question would be that, unfortunately, governments, qualified public opinions, with the exception perhaps of academia or research centers, are not tuned to long-term perspectives. Take, for instance, the report by the climatologists for the Mediterranean, which was released on October the 10th in Barcelona in 2019, or a previous World Bank report forecasting the rise of the level of seawater, entailing structural damages to the southern Mediterranean coastline through salinization of land, loss of crops in a perspective of 10, 15 years or 20 years. Well, do you really believe that governments have increased their posture in finding effective cooperation measures for that? I haven't seen anything of this kind. What I can tell you is that, and I acknowledge the political wisdom by France for once. Please don't misunderstand me. I mean, I would like to specifically recognize this political wisdom gesture of convening the first ministerial meeting of ministers in charge of territorial cohesion and sustainable development, urban sustainable development, a bit more than a year ago in Montpellier. And that was the first meeting of this kind ever, perhaps because someone felt that the World Bank forecasts needed to be taken seriously and start devising a sort of common grammar on how to cope with this very difficult, if not catastrophic, perspective. So we are, to summarize my thought, I would like to say that we are at the very early stages of a common action, which is very badly needed and should make a decisive progress in matters of months, not years, because a deadline of 20 years can only be met if we get organized now and not at the 19th year in the row. Thank you.
You have been wonderful because you have been able to condense a whole conference, as you said, in 2 minutes. Wonderful. So this brings us to the end of our conference today. I think it was extremely exciting and interesting. Thank you very much to the very distinguished high-level speakers we had. We have received interesting questions from the floor, which you have wonderfully addressed. I ask the organizers to put up the commercial for the next conferences. You have the dates. You have the dates. You have the titles. You can go to www.remenergy.it to register. And thank you again. Oh yes, just one information. I've been told by the organizers that we have kept practically all the participants from the beginning up to the very end, and this is thanks to you, panelists. So thank you very much, and looking forward to see you soon again. And thank you to the participants who have kept us up with us up to now. Bye bye. Enjoy your
Bye.
so, bye bye. Your weekend when you are in Abu Dhabi. Bye bye.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.